congratulations on your pub day.
Thank you. Thank you all for helping celebrate.
So I thought we could start by talking about a little bit about what the themes of this book are. And I was looking again at a review. You've had so many great reviews in the past few days. They've just been rolling in, and it's been so fun to watch. And one of the reviews kind of summed up the thematic content of the book. Each of these witty, intelligent stories is a slice of modern life with complications caused by finances, race, aging bodies, cooling marriages, and growing children. So would you say that sort of sums up what the range of things in the book is and sort of how
Yeah, very succinctly. But okay, first I just have to say thank you all for coming. Thank you for helping me celebrate. And also, this is such a particular joy, like to be in conversation with my editor is like it's very sort of standard at this point that two writers will be in conversation with each other, but it's so special and exciting when an editor, and especially, I mean, like it's very, I adore Jennifer, everyone adores Jennifer, and she's so good at her job, and there's so many writers whose books I'm sure you enjoy, she also edited, but I think that I've like maybe floated this idea a time or two, and like you kind of very elegantly like rebuffed me, and then I was like, you live in New Jersey, like almost like there's no reason, and then I also was kind of like, I'm sure this is like a once in a lifetime experience for both of us. And I was like, have you been in conversation with any of your other writers? And she's like, well, yes, recently with Jodi Picoult. She was, which also Jodi Picoult is like a super lovely person too. But anyway, so thank you so much. And I feel like if you like, I think it is more special and exciting to like have access or pick the brain, like writers are always like hawking ourselves, but if there's like a Q&A session, you should like direct all your comments about the inner workings of like what happens at the highest levels of Random House. I'm sure Jennifer would be happy to tell you. Anyway, but okay, so to answer this specific question, again, thank you for doing this, and I think that is a very good description. Like I think even when I was saying to you, like I was like, I feel like I might have another story collection in here. It might be time, and I think that I was saying like some of the topics, and it is funny how sometimes there'll be like very early wording that we use to talk about things, and it even like some of it will fall away. We'll be like, oh no, that's not what the book was about, and then some of it might literally end up being like jacket copy. And I think some of the things of like friendship, marriage, middle age, artistic ambition, those are things that kind of from the beginning, I think we both felt like the book was about, or those are some of the recurring themes in the there's 12 short stories.
Right. I mean, the one thing that this didn't list was the female friendship, which for me is almost the thing that stands out the most about the stories.
Yeah, well, it's been interesting, even kind of talking about like, and again, today is literally the publication day, but I've done a few interviews, and I wrote an essay that appeared in The Guardian that was sort of like us, like an ode to like middle-aged friendship. It's so funny because, and I think it seems like this is true for both of us, that like our friendships are so central to our lives, but it's a very strange thing for me where I'm almost like, am I selling that? Or like I'll be like talking about, like my friend Aaron who is my friend, and I'm like, am I like monetizing my friendship with her or something? Like where is it?
Friend Aaron who picked out her out.
I know, she said this is as I told the Wall Street Journal the other day, she's a very talented writer who well, I don't know if it's been announced, so I will not take this opportunity to mention her forthcoming book, but she's not, even though you might think looking at me that she's a stylist, but she's not a stylist, but she recently, when I wrote my last book, Romantic Comedy, she was like, you've written a fun book, and you should have fun clothes, and a lot of your clothes are kind of tired. Which she's a good enough friend that she even was like, and you need new bras. And so then for this one, I think because there was I got like a pink sweatshirt, and I had almost never worn pink in my adulthood. And so if you have the book, like literally the flap copy is yet. So I am like, and I'm kind of like I was saying to Jennifer, I'm like, I did it once with romantic comedy. I'm not really sure if I want to match my book again. Like it is happening tonight, but I'm not. This might be like one night only. But so we'll see. We'll see. Anyway.
You're a very lucky audience.
Yeah, in so many ways.
So one of the other themes that seems like it has really stood out in the reviews that you've had so far, aside from them all being glowing, is several of them have talked about the fact that this is a book that will be enjoyed by people who don't usually like short stories, and one of the reviews said it's a form that the average American reader is quote-unquote not so sure about. Why do you think people are suspicious of short stories, and why do you think your short stories are more approachable for people?
Okay, so I'll try to answer this, and I'd be curious on your response too. So I think based on feedback, my essential understanding of why people often think they don't like short stories is that they feel like a story maybe asks them to kind of like work and figure out who the characters are and what the situation is, and then it's over, and they sort of feel like it was a waste of time, and they have to do it all over again. And I mean, I kind of, there's a part of me that's like, well, the counter argument is actually, especially if you read before bed, which I won't pretend is what I always do, but I usually feel better and sleep better if I do, that you can kind of like read one in one sitting, and it's fine if you don't remember the protagonist's name or whatever, you know, like, that it's like, to consume it in its entirety, like, in, you know, at one time, that there's something kind of nice and satisfying about that. I don't know. Because it is a very strange compliment when someone says, I don't like short stories, but I like yours. And I'll feel torn between like egotism and like defensiveness of all other short story writers. Now, sometimes I'll think, I don't think you've read that widely because there's so many incredible stories. I guess if I was to say one thing, I feel like there's maybe we were actually talking a little bit about backstage about magazines and sort of, you know, most magazines are not thriving as they were like 25 years ago or something. And I think from a very young age, my family subscribed to tons of magazines. And I read, you know, like Reader's Digest, and like someone gave my mother a subscription to Redbook, and she never read it. And from the age of like 8, I was like, and I think I felt like I was getting a very like literal idea of adulthood, which I wasn't at all. Like I would read literally, I would read Can This Marriage Be Saved? And Good Housekeeping, or like I read from a very young age. I read Town and Country, and then I feel like everything weird about me could be like, I read Town and Country when I was like 8.
Like me reading every book my mom ordered from the Literary Guild, whether it was appropriate or not.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and again, it's very interesting to read stuff that's like not targeted. It's not the most inappropriate or scandalous thing, and that also kind of makes it like interesting. Anyway, so. But I do feel like I then wrote for magazines in my 20s, and I actually do think I do not, for the most part, write stories that are difficult to enter. And so maybe that's what, that it's not having to make a lot of effort, being you know, you know what emotional situation you're in, I think, but I don't know, what's your theory?
Well, so a couple of the reviews said that they felt like, and I don't think that this is true, but that there was closure at the end of the story in a way that a lot of short stories don't give you closure. And I thought that was interesting, that you felt like you came away almost having learned something or having a
Really?
Yeah.
Actually, it's so funny because with my first story collection, you said something, I don't know if you remember saying this, but So, like many fiction writers, I sort of wrote short stories and then almost like graduated to writing novels, even though it's not like I think stories are a lesser form, but kind of got on that track. And then when I was I'm now 49, like in my early 40s, wrote a short story for the first time. I think I had been commissioned by a magazine one or two times, but wrote one sort of totally on my own, and was almost like, where have they been all this time? Like, this is so fun, and you don't have to do this for 3 years, you could do this for 6 weeks or whatever. But I remember a piece of feedback you gave me with my 2018 story collection was, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, it was something almost like you want to feel now I'm I really feel like I might be making this up, but that it's almost like instead of a door closing, it's like a window opening, or that it's like there's some, it's less resolution than sort of possibility. Does that sound, are you I would never say those words?
I remember the conversation, I don't remember what pithy wisdom.
Yeah. No, but it was weird because I was I went to, the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I was I had never heard someone say that the ending of a story should not be overly resolved or tied up with a bow. So if a review says there's resolution, are you no, there's not? Or are you it's a good review, I don't care?
It's a good review, I don't care. Okay, let's see here. So this is one that I wanted to ask you. I think I told you I was going to ask you this. So Curtis published her novel Prep 20 years ago, and in the collection there's a story that revisits the main character, and I'm just curious what that was like emotionally to go back to this character that was so much a part of a different time in your life, and what that felt like as a writer.
Yeah. Well, okay, should I we talked about it. I'll read a tiny bit, a page or something of the prep story, and then you can see what it's like to go back to. Okay, so this is the sort of protagonist of Prep, whose name is Lee, who, in Prep, she's sort of telling the story. It's kind of implied that she's in her 20s, but for most of it, she's in the thick of being in boarding school. And she, as if you haven't read it, she was a scholarship student from Indiana and felt very out of her element at her fancy Massachusetts boarding school. So the story, it's the last story, which there's a surprising number of people who seem to they have to get my permission. They feel like they have to get my permission to skip ahead. I feel this is, laws don't really exist. That's a kind of, it's a funny one to still feel so restrained by a table of contents. But I give you my blessing to, okay. I suppose it was because my 30th alt reunion was coming up that I found myself thinking again about my encounter with Bryce Finley. This was the one boarding school story I'd never told, not to Martha or anybody else at alt, not to the friends I made in college or after, not to my husband when I got married. Over the years, I regularly recalled what had happened, especially for obvious reasons in 2003, but still I never told anyone. At first, I didn't tell because I didn't know if I'd be describing something magical or humiliating. Then because it seemed private, and the privacy of it didn't seem to be mine. And finally, I didn't tell because I wasn't confident I could depict the events properly without setting them up for misinterpretation. But maybe I am using 3 justifications to say the same thing. At last, on the other side of my reunion, I've told not 1 but 2 people. No doubt it was in part the milestone of 3 decades that prompted my disclosure. Surely, by any measure, the statute of limitations had passed. Now, in my early 50s, alt is both in my alt is the name of the school, alt is both in my bloodstream and a negligible part of my daily existence. To be sure, it shaped many of my lifelong habits and preferences. A fondness for fleece jackets and white button-down shirts, a sentimental attachment to the hymn Jerusalem and all the Christmas ones from the service of lessons and carols. My subconscious sense that it's morally wrong not to exercise every day, even as I consciously find this notion ridiculous at best and probably downright repugnant, and my pronunciation of certain words, so the first syllable of deliver rhymes not with he, as my mother said it, but with huh, as my classmates at Alt said it. Having spent most of my adulthood back in the Midwest, I'm occasionally asked where my accent is from, and rarely does it feel appropriate to say it's the accent of a middle-class girl from Indiana who went to a fancy Massachusetts boarding school. What I say instead, brightly, is, I'm not sure. For a long time, I thought it was hard to explain alt succinctly, but eventually I realized that it was merely hard to explain it honestly. And the explanation that was both succinct and honest is, as a boarding school student, I always felt that I was implicitly apologizing for not being sufficiently rich and preppy and privileged. In all the years since I graduated, I've been reckoning with just how rich, preppy, and privileged I am.
How many people in the room have read Prep? Wow, look at that.
Oh my goodness.
Have any of you read the story in the book yet? It's so good.
It's only published today.
today.
I mean, yeah, and although another feature of like the way that publishing has changed is that, you know, like through NetGalley or whatever. Yeah. There's all sorts of ways that like somebody will be like, I didn't even request it, and it like almost like it came into my email. I'm sorry.
So I did not edit Prep, and I think maybe it was your fourth book that
Yeah.
I started working on.
Yeah.
But I did start at Random House, we realized, like almost exactly the time Prep was published. So I've had this front row seat at the whole arc of your career, and 9 books now, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious how you feel like you've evolved as a writer in that time, and sort of what you feel like you've learned about being a writer.
That's such a good
It's a big
question.
question.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I mean, specifically, something that I have thought about in terms of the story collection, and I think this was probably true for my 2018 story collection too, is I think if I had had a story collection come out when I was in my 20s, I think I would have purposely wanted the stories to be as different from each other as possible so that I could prove that I was capable. Like they would have been set in different times or like different places, or had maybe characters who were more demographically different from each other. And I kind of like, you know, if I read someone else's collection, I sort of like the preoccupations of one person's brain, and so I'll sort of joke that, and I live in Minneapolis, but I'll joke that the book is about like grouchy liberal Midwestern women, but it really is true. I mean, like in some cases it's about like, you know, like a grouchy liberal woman who lives, I don't know, like in somewhere Arizona or something. So I feel like maybe I have some recognition that you like I should kind of pick what I'm trying to do with each book and like do it as well as I can, but I'm not trying to do an unlimited number of things with each book, and it also I mean, so we were talking about, like, I wrote for magazines, and I had a full-time job for a few years at a business magazine in my 20s, and then even when I went to graduate school, I'd freelance, and sometimes I would write for Teen People, like the junior version of People magazine, which, you know, has not existed for a long time, but I would interview sort of like teen prodigies, some of whom actually have gone on to be like kind of famous. But I feel like there came to be like a fork in the road of fiction or nonfiction. And also, at that time in my life, I also probably felt like to interview celebrities or write celebrity profiles would be like a very glamorous and exciting way to spend one's life. And I remember thinking, I don't know how many years ago, this was maybe like between 5 and 10 years ago, that like essentially there's so many writers who I respect who, like, if they wrote a profile of a celebrity and it was in the New Yorker or the New York Times Magazine, I'm sure I would like devour it, depending on the writer, depending on the celebrity. I think it was so good and interesting, but it also would have to hit certain things, like there's certain kind of mandatory things about any person's life. And I kind of was like, if I write a celebrity profile, I might be doing like a B+ version of something that a lot of other people could do, and some of them could do like an A+ or A version. But only I will write the stories that I write, which doesn't mean that everyone will like them. It doesn't mean that they'll all like objectively be A+, but they definitely will like come out of my brain and nobody else's. And I think that was also a useful realization to just kind of remember going forward, or even kind of like it's fine to lean into my weird preoccupation, or not so weird, my like bougie middle-aged woman preoccupation.
So a lot of the stories actually, where you say that it's like grouchy middle-aged women, but a lot of the stories you get a really clear glimpse of the woman that they were when they weren't middle-aged.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I love about the book. Like you've said, I think that a lot of the stories are about people rethinking the choices they made and wondering, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like something that's really, I mean, there's so many things that are fascinating to me. Like one thing, and the passage of time is super fascinating to me. And even like, if there's a person you haven't seen for 20 or 30 years and they haven't done something that's like, objectively so interesting with their life, still, it's fascinating to see, like, even to be like, you haven't really done anything for 30 years. Everyone has done something. But there's this sort of, like, the passage of time is almost like inherently a plot or something, so that's really interesting to me. And something else that I find so fascinating is that there can be, like, any of us could have an experience or know a person, and like it sort of is what it is, and then time passes, like 10 or 20 or 30 years pass, and obviously that event doesn't change, and that the way that we interact with another person doesn't change, but our own understanding of it can change so dramatically. And I just think that's like super interesting, and that you can kind of be like, oh, like I think I misbehaved in like 1998, like, and I didn't see it at all that way at the time, or I think that I felt like I did something really wrong, and now I look back and I didn't do something wrong at all. And I just feel like the ways that our thinking changes based on all these other experiences we've had along the way is like totally fascinating to me.
Do you have a favorite story in the collection? Because I was thinking, I think some of my favorite stories are the ones that are about that thing.
That have like the jump in time. Well, I will say, so I feel like you kind of asked this and I maybe didn't answer it. Like the experience of writing the prep sequel. Well, okay, so are we allowed to tell the little tidbit about that?
Sure. I might not leave this room in one piece.
So I feel like, I don't know how many years ago this was, like, let's say like 8 years ago or something. I think I said, like, sometimes I feel like I have a prep sequel inside me, and the way I quote you is that you basically said, so many people have such a special place in their heart for that book, that I think well, and then I'm saying, I'm paraphrasing what she said, but that like, you're like, I think maybe you should just, like leave it alone and let it be. Like, I think that almost, again, and I don't think you said this part explicitly, but like, people, for various reasons, people could not like the sequel, and I always had so much respect and appreciation. I think you were right, and even in all honesty, you know, I wrote this novel, Rodham, which is like this sort of, you know, fictional retelling of Hillary Clinton's life after I had written American Wife, a fictional retelling of Laura Bush's life. So they're totally not sequels, and they were so aggressively compared to each other, and people often unfavorably compared Rodham to second. So I almost like got a taste of that, where I was like, oh, I think you're totally right, because, and even like, yeah, like people would almost be like, she shouldn't have written this. And I was like, you can not like it, but should I not? Anyway, so then when I had the idea, like I was kind of like, I think I realized that this story collection would come out like 20 years after Prep had, and they're almost the way you might go to like a reunion. Like it felt like, oh, this could be, like I felt like I have a story inside me, and then I ran it by you, and so was it that like a short story felt so much lower stakes than a novel? Because you did give me your blessing.
Let it be known, first of all, that Curtis does all kinds of things that I either tell her not to do or vice versa. I think, yeah, I thought that a short story would be a really interesting way to revisit the world of that novel without trying to somehow recreate the world of that novel.
Yeah.
It just seems like a way to go back there without completely changing the experience for people.
Yeah.
In a way that was like needed to be preserved somehow in my mind.
And did you feel like, if I had written a novel, did you feel at any sense like, oh, people will be cynical and think like, that's just like a publishing cash grab or whatever, or was that not a
I
consideration?
wouldn't have worried about that as much because, I mean, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like creatively people should ultimately, writers should ultimately write the thing that they're most passionate about writing.
Yeah.
And if that was a concern, I would have not, no.
Yeah.
I think it was more about people's relationship with the novel. People do have such a special relationship to that novel, and they hold it very close to their heart. And I think sometimes you just can't go home again, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, it's a really tricky thing. And, but I think if you had said, I have to write this, this is something I really need to do, I would have been like, of course.
Well, and I'm not just saying this because like we have witnesses in it, but I feel so grateful for, like, one of the things that makes me, there's a lot of things that make me feel very, very lucky as a person and a writer, and one of the things is I feel like you have said that many times, that you essentially, like there are enough ideas that I float, and probably some of them have much more commercial appeal and much less commercial appeal, and you always have basically said to me, like, you should write the thing that you feel the need to write, which is like such a, like, you know, privilege, like that's like the dream come true of being a writer, is to like write the thing that you most want to write. I mean, so in terms of the actual story, I did feel like I think I probably told you that I was going to write it, and then secretly was like, well, if it turns out really badly, I'll just pull it or something, you know, like you'll know, but then I wanted to clear a threshold of quality, or else it felt like it wasn't worth doing, and it was kind of like fun and surprising how easy it felt to slip back into that world, and even like, you know, some of it, like there's a part where Lee, you know, in her late 40s, is at her reunion, kind of thinking like uncharitable thoughts about how boring her classmates are, who are talking about their massive kitchen renovations, and she's kind of like, are they always so unself-conscious about, I mean, they're so boring, of course, but they're so unself-conscious about kind of like the implications of like, you have to get on a wait list for this kind of refrigerator, whatever. So I quite enjoy writing that kind of thing. And then, but again, I kind of like it's such a weird, like I think for me, being a fiction writer it's such a weird combination of like trusting yourself, but then like knowing that, you know, your own view can be distorted, which is why editors can be very wonderful and useful. And so I started showing it to people, like including, like I have 2 sisters and a brother, like some of my friends, and the feedback was very positive. Actually, one of my sisters, like I probably showed it to even like maybe 10 people early on, which is more than I would normally show a story to. But it was almost like a focus group or something. And one of my sisters clearly wanted, what she wanted instead of the story I wrote, she wanted like the version that you would see after the credits in a movie, where it would be like, this person, you know, retired in Florida, and this person, and I was like, no, it's a little more focused than that, but everyone else was really positive. Then I wrote another story and showed it to some of the same people, and they were like, Curtis, this story has like a lot of problems, and I actually was so relieved, because I was like, oh, like that gives credibility to, like when they told me they really liked the prep story, they meant it, which as a side note, a phenomenon which I learned while doing research about SNL for my novel Romantic Comedy is that supposedly the cast members like the fact that every episode sketches can and do bomb, because it gives meaning to when like they get a really wonderful response, and you don't want to like, you don't want it to be like you come on stage and everyone just starts laughing because they love you so much. You know, you want to have to earn it. So I was kind of like, oh, okay. So not to set your expectations too high, which you might feel like my sister does.
It's a long story too.
Yeah.
Story, so you do really feel like you get your like money's worth. Like you get to live there for a little while, but I also feel like it's the perfect amount. Did your siblings feel that? Like,
they said it was perfect. So it has 2 timelines where one, Lee tells the story that she says, like, this is the story I've never told about this thing that happened in, you know, when I was a student, which I'll just say, because we, you know, it's stressful times. It's not creepy. It's like, but it's, and then she's at her reunion. So it is almost like 2, you might, depending on your sleep habits, it might not do the thing, but that I was like, stories are so great, you might not be able to read the entire thing before bed. It's like 50 pages, two nights. You can read it over 2 nights.
But did any of your siblings say, no, I really wish you'd written the whole novel?
I think actually my brother was like, you could just keep going, you know, you could, like almost like how long does a book have to be considered? If you've done a third of the work, which I don't know, what's the shortest thing that I could turn in that you would be like, this is enough?
Maybe double the length.
100? You would take 100 pages as a novel? I mean, well, so I actually, by coincidence, I'm writing something that I think will be like my shortest novel, which partly because, so I really admire Mohsin Hamid, and I don't know if some of you read like Exit West or How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia, and his books tend to be like 200 pages, and it feels like they're exactly the length that they should be, and I'm kind of like, how does he do that? I want to do that too, and yeah, so and partly, I think, and I don't think this like reflects that well on me, but if one of you said like, I just read the greatest book, and then you're like, this is what it's called, it's like 700 pages, I think I'd be like, oh, maybe I'll wait till the summer or something. And if you're like, I just read the greatest book and it's 200 pages, I feel like I would buy it in the airport tomorrow and read it, or I buy it in independent bookstore, and so in some ways I kind of, like, there's just something about, yeah, like there's something, do you agree with what I'm saying, or do you not really agree?
I do, and I was actually reflecting on the fact that every time you write a book, you said, and this one's going to be really short.
I know.
She's like, this one is going to be really short, and I'm going to be done really fast. And then it comes in 4 years later.
I know. Although I actually think that
worked on Romantic
Romantic
Comedy.
Comedy was the,
Yeah.
it was the I mean, it's like a 300-page book, so it's not exceptionally short at all, but it was the, and also, I think I wrote it like barely leaving the house, you know, like it was sort of like my own pandemic, barely traveling, it was like my own pandemic escape, but it was lined up, it has happened before that I've been like, and I really want to write a 200-page novel that's like, but I think it might happen, maybe this time, or next time.
So you brought up Rodham and American Wife. If you were, and you may decide you never ever want to write that kind of book again, but if you were going to, is there anybody that you're kind of, that's on your mind?
It's so funny, I can't believe that you, of all people, are asking me this in public. Like, we can't tell.
You can tell the fake answer if you want.
No. There is a like long deceased first lady that I would consider that but there's no kind of current, literally, or I don't think I'll.
I think in a recent interview, in one of the interviews for this book, someone asked you if you'd ever write about Melania.
And the answer is no. I do get asked that like relatively frequently, and the answer has always been no. But I mean, other people, actually, someone, I feel like a part of me is like, should I say this in case the person doesn't? Somebody reached out to me, like a writer I respect, and they said, do you want to, I think it was a serious offer, do you want to co-write a novel from the perspective of like Usha Vance? And I said, no thank you, but if you write it, I would be happy to be in touch with you and kind of like give you feedback, and so we'll see, so you can stay tuned.
Are there any other famous people that aren't wives of presidents that you're...
Well, first of all, I do sometimes feel like because Rodham is like an alternate history, I mean, obviously,
Yes.
it's not, like I can understand, it's very fair that someone would be like, you're so interested in first ladies, but
It's not really a book about a first lady.
Part of the reason that she was interesting to me is that I had this realization around the time of the 2016 election that school children who knew she was running for president did not necessarily even know that Bill Clinton existed. And then I kind of would think, well, what if that was true for adults? Like, what if adults were evaluating her as herself and not as this political spouse? And so in some ways, it's almost like the opposite of being like having an interest in, although of course I myself, you know, it's like I learned who she was when Bill Clinton was running for office when I was I guess I was a junior in high school. And then when he took office, I was a senior. But, I mean, I think that, because also sometimes people will kind of ask a little bit about the, writing fiction about public figures and almost like the morality of it, which I think is a fair question. And, I feel like I have these rules for myself, which I can't really prove that I have them, but I would never write fiction based on a real person as a form of like character assassination, or like I would only write about somebody that I had not necessarily like that I wholeheartedly admired, but that I had some affection or respect for, partly because I wouldn't want to like spend all my writing time with like someone I thought was loathsome. And yeah, like I kind of feel like I also probably would write fiction about someone where I kind of thought like, what do I think of this person? Or this person seems contradictory, and that's kind of, I think, some of what motivates me to write it. And I think this happens also with like social issues or whatever, is feeling confusion about what I think and then writing fiction to help. And even like sometimes like characters in my fiction will be having arguments, and like I kind of like side with both of them or something, or with neither of them. I can like see the argument that both of them are making.
I definitely have, I think, more than one author who has said in different ways that they write about the things that are keeping them up at night. And
Yeah.
it's their way of working out how they feel or what's their understanding.
Yeah, I know, it's very, so I actually did an event in Minneapolis with Jonathan Goldstein. Do you all know the podcast Heavyweight? It was just, it's the greatest thing of all time. And it was actually announced today. It's been available through Spotify, but they just made a deal. There was an article in the New York Times today with Pushkin. So it's essentially, it's having a new season, but just out of curiosity, like raise your hand if you've heard of Okay, so Jonathan Goldstein was, he was on like This American Life for years, and basically, and there's a bunch of 6 seasons of Heavyweight, but the premise is, it's all nonfiction. Like a person will, kind of say, this thing haunts me from my past, and either I did something that I regret, or or somebody else did something, and I never understood why, and I kind of want to settle it, and Jonathan, who is very frank about is not a counselor, does not have professional, he's like a storyteller, but will kind of help them, gather information, or help them kind of go back, and maybe they end up having a conversation with a person from the past, maybe they go to a location that was important in the past or whatever, and they're incredibly, I feel like they give you the thing that fiction ideally gives you, which is you feel there's such an expansive view of what it is to be a person, and even the way they're structured. I think he is. This is a very sort of writerly compliment, but the way he'll give you a piece of information 2/3 of the way through that he could have given you very early on, but it's so much more powerful and all this stuff. But anyway, this is all a super long way of saying when I had this conversation with him, one of the episodes, he kind of gives, includes footage from when he was a child and teenager, and he's 55 now, and he was already recording stuff, and we were kind of having this conversation about there's something very strange when you're talking about writers writing what keeps them up at night, to make your livelihood and your career out of something that's kind of essentially self-soothing. It's a double-edged sword, where it's you're so lucky, and then there's something so odd about it, and I definitely think he does that, and I don't think this is primarily catharsis. I think it's primarily storytelling, but again, it's there are certain themes, and it's this.
Hi, thank you for this. It's been so great. Do you know if Hillary Clinton or Laura Bush ever read those books or commented on them?
So the short answer is no. You might be surprised that there's a longer answer. No, I think they both were asked at least once in interviews. And I think Laura Bush, I think she was asked about that. And do you remember there was an Oliver Stone movie, W? And she said something along the lines of I don't have to read them or watch them, I lived it. And so plenty of people have said to me, of course they read them, they're big readers, and I actually believe that they didn't, because they're so incredibly famous that I feel they have probably had to develop kind of habits for tuning out information that's not useful, and even though those novels are my babies, I'm sure they're a minor irritation, and so I know that people who know them have read them, and it seems I get more positive feedback from people who have known Hillary Clinton and that novel, which might be because I'm very open about being a Democrat, or or it might just be for other reasons. But anyway.
Thank you for sharing a lot of your process. I was just wondering if when you're writing a short story and you come to, it could be any part along the way, but you write something and you think at first, this is really right. And then when you sit with it, you realize, no, it's not true, but it fits the arc, or it fits the way you were moving with the story. Just what do you do with that?
Do you mean it's not true? Well, since I write, you don't mean true, like fiction,
It's not-
non-fiction.
Yes, I don't mean that. I mean, it's not true to what this character would do.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems like it,
Yeah.
and then you realize, no, that's really not right.
Yeah.
And how do you resolve that? Or maybe you haven't been up against that.
Well, I mean, I revise a lot, and so almost always, like, it's like the norm that I write something or start writing something, and this is totally sincere and not like falsely modest. Like, I can't believe how bad it is. And sometimes I think that like the main difference between a professional writer and more of like a hobbyist writer is just like essentially the persistence, or kind of being like, yeah, of course that draft turned out badly, and then I'll revise it like 12 times or something. And sometimes things turn out okay the first time, and then sometimes they don't. So, and I mean, again, I think that it is sort of useful, or for me, I think it's been a good thing. Like, I've actually never lived in New York or New Jersey. Like kind of, I mean, I feel like if I'm like sitting in my office in Minnesota, I can kind of write whatever and see how it turns out. And if it's like unfixably bad, then no one even needs to know that it ever existed.
Do you feel like if you lived in New York and you were writing it in New York, somebody would know that?
I feel like you like smell it. No, but there is something like, well, it's funny, something that I wonder about. Like, I had breakfast with a writer friend, and I was almost like, if you live in Brooklyn, how do you know how often to see your editor? Like you always, if you come to New York like every 2 years, like of course you see your editor, but like, I don't know, like I feel like somebody once told me, they said something like, and it was a person who I think lives in Brooklyn, they were like, if you live in Brooklyn, you are never even the most successful writer in your subway car. I was like, that sounds terrible. Like, that would be so bad for my ego. So.
I was wondering, since you started by reading excerpts from a review, do you read reviews of your work? And if so, how does that affect you?
Okay, I definitely wish I didn't, and also like there's no hope for me if it's like, if Shrek came out 20 years ago and I'm still reading reviews, like, so the only thing, like I actually love when there's a bad review and it's behind a paywall. I think it's so funny because I'm kind of like, well, like, yeah, like a lot of times you get like, it'll be like, I mean, you might not know this. There's one clearly bad review in a British publication. I'm sure none of us are going to go to the trouble of subscribing. And so it's almost like, you know, like tedious stories about suburban America. And then it's like, well, who knows? Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like that I feel curious. And sometimes I'll think like I will admit, which this might be another thing when you're like, how have things changed over time? Like, I almost maybe wouldn't have admitted this in like 15 years ago or something, but there have been a few times when I've read like reader reviews online, and they've basically been like, you know, I've been with Random House the whole time. I've been extraordinarily lucky. I've definitely had up, you know, like some books have sold more or less, or been more or less positively reviewed. And a few times, readers have almost been like, Curtis, you can do better than this. You know, like I really enjoyed this, but I didn't enjoy this. And I've occasionally, like again, there is something you can really feel where feedback, like if it's coming from a place of like generosity or good faith, but then at the same time you do have to just like sometimes people will be like, this just feels really, you know, like I loved like romantic comedy, I loved Rodham, and I loved her first story collection. I'm like, okay, then you really should like all of it, because it is consistent. Like, I can understand you being like, I disliked American Life and I disliked Rodham, but I'm kind of like, that's inconsistent. Like, if you like, so.
Does your family ever get mad when they read reviews of your work that are
Oh my
negative?
God, it's so funny that you think they read reviews.
The reason I ask that is because once my mother read a review of a book I'd worked on, and it said something like, "Where was the editor on this book?" And she knew that I'd done a lot of work on that book, and like that the author didn't want to do all the things I wanted them to do.
Yeah.
And so she got very upset on my behalf.
Oh, did you feel like vindicated at all, or were you like, yeah, I really wish the writer had listened?
Yeah,
You can whisper to me who it was. Jennifer is very discreet. Sometimes I try to squeeze gossip out, but she's very, very discreet.
That might go against my question. So first of all, one, I'm here for a 100-page novella prep. So I'm here for that.
Okay.
Second of all, are the rumors true about romantic comedy becoming a movie?
So this is an interesting question. So my books have been getting optioned for 20 years, and I was saying, like, I feel like eventually one of them will, make it to the screen, and I would certainly, so the book was optioned by Hello Sunshine, Reese Witherspoon's company, and I feel like she is a force and has a very great success record. So if I were gonna bet on any of it, I mean, it does seem like something in me, which I'm not really, I'll sometimes like read a script or whatever, but I'm not writing them, and there's nothing I can really do to make it go forward or not. So, yeah, I mean, there is a script, and it was written by two people who have sort of professional comedy experience in a way that I definitely don't. So I was like, oh, you can kind of tell in a good way that it's like funnier than the book. And so I, again, like fingers crossed, but I have been the kiss of adaptation death for 20 years. I'm like, oh wow. No, it'll happen eventually. It will.
So, as you know, because I told you before, I read romantic comedy twice. I finished it, and then I didn't want to leave the world of the book, so I reread it. And I'm just wondering it's really different in a lot of ways from your other books. So what prompted you to write a romantic comedy?
Yeah.
And what, were you interested in Saturday Night Live to start out with, or how did that happen?
So, I mean, I had watched SNL off and on since my childhood, and I just wrote like a very short piece about this, but SNL and I are like almost exactly the same age, where I was born in August and it was born in October, but then it's just turned 50, and I'm not turning 50 until August. So especially during the pandemic, my family, I have two teenagers, and my family would watch SNL, and I would think to myself, I really enjoyed it, and it was especially we were watching like Kate McKinnon, A.D. Bryant episodes, and I would think to myself, someone should write a screenplay for a romantic comedy where the premise is that like a female writer for a show like SNL makes fun of the phenomenon of male cast members or writers dating or marrying like beautiful, super famous female celebrity guests who come on the show, but it doesn't really happen with like super famous male celebrities coming on the show and dating or marrying female writers. So I would like there's obviously like real world examples of this. And then I was writing a different novel that I had said to Jennifer, I'm writing a short novel about it. I mean, again, because it was like the pandemic and I wanted to write something sort of like fun just for myself. And then time passed, and I set aside this other book, and then I thought, like, oh, instead of that screenplay that someone should write, like it should be a novel, and someone who writes it should be me. And so that was I feel like more than once, I've almost like been thinking like, someone should write this book, someone should write it, and then being like, oh wait, like even with American Wife, I actually basically wrote an essay that was published in an online magazine that was like, Laura Bush's life is like a great American novel. And then I, like, maybe a year later, I was dropped. Yeah, and then I was like, oh, I wish I hadn't said great. But I also, part of me was also like, I wish I hadn't like said any. Like, then I was like, somebody's gonna see that, and they're gonna write theirs first. But it didn't happen. Thank you.
So I have a follow-up question to that. I've also read romantic comedy. When I read it the first time, I spent a weekend reading and rereading it, and then in anticipation of tonight, I decided to reread it last week, and then I basically spent the last week just start to finish.
Wow.
And so my question is, do you have any comfort reads like that, and what would you recommend?
Oh, that's a good question. I think my comfort read is like people.com or something, which might explain why I wrote romantic comedy. It's funny, I have a friend who kind of comfort listened to the audio of my book Eligible. And then there's also, I met a bookseller in Australia one time who was like, every year for Boxing Day, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's so many books in the world and I'll never kind of read them all. So I'm trying to think if there's even like passages that I reread or, that's a good question. I don't know that I have like a comfort maybe I need one. Maybe I should write one. Yeah, it is also funny when somebody will be like, I just reread, Prep or something, and I'll think like, oh, like you might remember it much better than I do. Or like I haven't. I listened to the audio of Prep almost to fact check the short story, and I had never listened to. I listened to like a few minutes of the audio of some of my books, but I had never listened to one in its entirety, and it was an interesting experience because it was such an old book to often be like, I knew which sentence was coming next, and then sometimes I was like, oh, that landed nicely, and then other times I was like, oh, that paragraph definitely, like, I should have cut it or whatever. Okay, should we like, I feel like, should we wrap up?
Well, let's see. Is there anybody here who wants to take this golden opportunity that might never
To
come
ask
again?
one final.
I'm a huge fan, in a little body, I'm a huge fan of education as well. But do you feel like, college, graduate school, the Iowa workshop I think you mentioned, do you think that really helped a lot? Do you feel you would have been the same writer with or without? Just curious. Thanks.
I consider myself incredibly lucky in terms of like I got a very good education from the time I was very young through graduate school. Like I think that there might be two separate questions. There are like education overall, which I feel like always helps a person, and then like MFAs specifically. And I actually entered the Iowa Writers Workshop on my 24th birthday, and I think in the way of a 24-year-old, I think I was like, I'm probably not going to learn very much, but like I'll have time to write, and I learned like so much, and I still think of the wisdom of my professors, and I still am like very good friends with some of my classmates, and we're each other's early readers and everything. So I do think I benefited from studying writing in the classroom and being around people. Partly it's also self-selecting. So if you take a creative writing class, or if you go to graduate school for creative writing, you'll find yourself with people who like at a restaurant or in a bar want to talk about like a story for 45 minutes. And that's, I mean, if you're a certain kind of person, that's like delightful. Like it's, yeah, it doesn't get any better. Anyway.